welcome back to MoAn Inc. If you guys are new here, then hello! My name is Erica, and it is a pleasure to have you joining me today on the channel. Because for today's video, as you can see from the title, we are going to be chatting about all things Horace today. But before we can get into that, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the bell icon so that you know every single time I post in the future. And now that you've so kindly done that, let's get into the video. Horace is probably one of the most famous poets from the ancient Roman world. If you have not heard his name before, well then welcome. You're about to get some drama llama in today's episode. Not as much as in Ovid's episode. If you guys are really here for like the goss, you are going to want to watch Ovid's context video. But anyways, not the point. Horace's birthdays and death dates are known to us much more certain than a lot of other authors that we've been talking about as I've been going through all of these context videos. So Horace himself is born in 65 BC or BCE, and he dies in 8 BC or BCE. And he dies in Rome after his very long career as an author. Now, when it comes to Horace's early life, it's really interesting because we know quite a bit about his early life. However, just about everything is contested, so technically we don't know all that much. So whilst I'm going through this little excerpt of the video, this part where we talk about his life and what sort of brought him to his works, just be aware of that everything that we have that's written down comes from other famous authors who have told us about him, all of this kind of stuff, and lots of historians, correctly so, or lots of other historians contest stories about Horace. Modern historians have gone into it being like, well, that can't be true, and like, how does that work, etc., etc. So I'm just gonna tell you a lot of the information that we have, but please be aware, with most of it, there is an argument. Outside of Horace's birthplace, we know who his father was, and according to the historical records, his father was a freedman of the Roman Republic at the time, right? So that would indicate that he was a slave at some point. Now, when he was a slave, when he was freed, hotly contested. We have absolutely no idea. Lots of people will say it was way before even Horace was born, that he was either born into slavery and then very quickly got out of it. He either bought his way out or he was, gifted his freedom. Like, people do not know, but his title seems to be that he was a freed man, and he was wealthy enough to a certain degree that he managed to get Horace a really good education, right? So Horace goes to Rome in his youth to study, as well as going to Greece to study, which if you guys are regulars on the channel, you will know that's literally what you have to do in order to have any kind of career. However, things start getting sticky for Horace, again, still before he was a writer or wrote anything, during the civil wars. So right after Julius Caesar is assassinated in 44 BC, if you guys don't know, Rome plunges into civil wars. And during these civil wars, apparently, Horace sides with those who assassinated Julius Caesar, right? So he takes a side in the civil war that is against Octavian, who will soon be the emperor of Rome in a number of years, all of that. And then he takes on the name Augustus, all of that, whatever, right? So he basically goes against that. Now, most specifically, he does this during the two battles of Philippi against Antony and Octavian. So Horace, who was a tribune at the time, he commands one of Brutus's and Cassian's legion, which is fascinating to think about, because obviously they lost, and then Octavian ends up ruling over everything. Now, this is really, the reason why I want to harp on this is because then Horace ends up back in Rome and is given a job, which is basically like a glorified cashier is what I'm going to call it, right? That's like not the official title of this role whatsoever. But he ends up becoming this like financial administrator, cashier type person for a quaestor. Now, a quaestor is a member of the Roman Senate, of the Roman government, and Horace ends up in this position, which links him very closely to the Senate, to the governing body, which will then link him close to Octavian. Now, this is bizarre. It's bizarre because Octavian wins, just to clarify. And just to beat you guys to the comment section below when you're going to be like, oh, well, it's not that. No, ancient authors also highlight how bizarre this was. In fact, there are so many theories about how exactly Horace ended up getting back into this position, because why he wasn't killed or exiled or banished, beyond so many people, including Suetonius. Suetonius says that somehow, some way he gets pardoned. He doesn't tell us anything specific, but he does indicate that Horace has to ask for a pardoning in order to get this role. So, okay. Now, it's in this position and during these years that Horace actually starts writing his first piece of work. Now, Horace is most famous for his Odes. That's what the image is in the thumbnail. That's the most important thing that we have people read and all of that kind of stuff nowadays. But this wasn't the first piece that he wrote. And whilst he's in this glorified cashier position, that's a horrible way for me to describe it. Some kind of like accountant? Maybe that's a better way of describing it. But I've done it now. I have to stick with it. So when he has become this glorified cashier, basically, in his spare time, he ends up writing his first piece of work. The publication of these poems is actually then what ends up getting Horace introduced to two of the most important people on the scene at this time. So Horace's poems lead him to becoming friends with Virgil, who's the guy that wrote the Aeneid. We've already discussed Virgil on the channel, by the way. And a very prolific writer at the time in Rome, whose name was Varius Rufus, who published these poems called De Morte, which is essentially these poems that were sort of comforting people about death, right? I feel like it's very self-explanatory with the title, but anyways. Horace being friends with Virgil and Rufus also connect him to a man called Maecenas. Now, as he meets this man called Maecenas is this very, very wealthy Roman, right? He's got like a shit ton of money, and he is best friends and best friends is like a very modern term. He has really good ties to the Emperor Augustus, and it's through this connection that's how Horace ends up being introduced to Augustus himself, which is why when we then see his next set of poems, which are called the epodes. Now, the epodes are a collection, or they might be known to you as the iambi, but they're a collection of 17 poems, heavily influenced not only by the teachings that Rufus was then offering to Horace through all of their meetings and all that kind of stuff about Epicurean philosophy, but these poems were also combined with a lot of glorification of Augustus. This includes Octavian's victory at the Battle of Actium, his defeat of Mark Antony and Cleopatra at the time, and a lot of the politics and stuff like that of what Augustus was pushing forward, Octavian was pushing forward. I'm just using both of those because I know that so many people on the internet only know him as Augustus, but there are dates to these name changes. That's a whole other video, though. But anyways, these poems were a combination of kind of all of that stuff, and they're called the epodes. After the epodes, these are followed by 2 books of satires, which are also called sermons, or could also be translated as conversations. You might have seen them in any of those, you might have heard any of those titles. And that is what these 2 books are after the epodes. And although, there is a lot of criticism happening about Horace's work at this time, just so that you are aware, these poems really he wrote during a journey he took with Maecenas in order to look at the resettlement of the Civil War veterans. So some view these poems as a bit autobiographical, some do. Again, remember there is like a lot of debate around Horace and about his life. Some people see it as being incredibly impacted and sort of more biographical about his father. Like really you can read all of these in like a totally different way. Again, this video is a bit tricky when it's like, some people think that welcome to the field. And it's after all of this that we finally come to Horace's Odes. Horace's Odes are without a doubt his most famous publication ever, okay? These, like I said at the start of the video, are what you are going to be reading if you are in Latin, or if you are in any kind of classes class, you're going to be directed to the Odes. The Odes consisted of 88 poems across 3 different books. These are lyrical poems, and they primarily celebrate Rome during the age of Augustus. Remember how I said that they were friends? That's kind of important. And in fact, after their publication, the emperor, so Augustus himself, was trying to encourage him to write a 4th book to publish more poems about how great he was. Because welcome to the empire. We see a lot of this of people close to the emperors throughout history. Now, personally, because this is my channel, I find one of the most fascinating things to know about the Odes is that originally when they came out, they were actually pretty poorly received. People who were not Augustus and not in the imperial family were not necessarily wild about this. And in fact, we hear that Horace really had to defend them because he was saying that they were written as more so hymns to the Greek gods, right? He believed that the Greeks were like the greatest writers, and it was a Roman's job, and in particular a poet's job, to try and emulate what the Greeks had done. Now, while all of this is going on, right, while his career is going fantastically and Augustus is like, write more, please, oh my goodness. We know that Horace did not actually settle down. He did not have a wife. He didn't have any kids. He seemed to be this eternal bachelor. We get this really odd note from Suetonius as well, where Suetonius describes... Probably shouldn't include this. The internet's gonna get really mad at me for this. I'm gonna say it anyways. Suetonius tells us one point about Horace and his appearance that I just think is noteworthy. And he says that the poet was short and fat. The reason why I think that that's noteworthy is because I'm always like, why did we need to know that? Like, why? Why? That doesn't impact him whatsoever. I know people on the internet are going to be like, we shouldn't be, but whatever. I'm just telling you what the Latin says. Take with it what you will. But regardless of why, Horace is this eternal bachelor, right? And actually Maecenas, something I didn't mention, but Maecenas even likes Horace at some point so much that he gives him like a plot of land. Horace has multiple homes. Like he ends up being super, super successful and is in this really great sphere of people, of influence, right? But again, he never settles down. And what's really interesting about that, and the reason why I wanted to point that out, is because when you read across his work, he doesn't seem to be anti-marriage. He doesn't seem to be anti-commitment. In fact, lots of his work does lean towards that he's kind of a bit of a hopeless romantic in that way. And he likes those ideas. It just isn't for him, if that makes sense. Which I always think is a really interesting way of like viewing him as a person, which is why I wanted to include this part in the video, that you can kind of see little glimmers of people in their work, even if they're not directly talking about themselves. And that's a really, I think, I don't know, is that a nice thing? Is that a beautiful thing? It's just, it's a thing, and it's about Horace, and I would like people to take that away. But very long story towards the end of Horace's life, that he has nothing to pass down, really. And in fact, he ends up remaining very close to the emperor, to Augustus. Augustus is bothering him for more work, being like, tell everybody how great I am, please keep going. And Horace at some point starts his decline in his age. And when he starts his decline, he starts saying no to Augustus and he can't continue. And actually, Maecenas has died a few years before. And so when Horace dies in 8 BCE, or BC, that he is actually buried close to Maecenas, which is very sweet. But that's really the end of his life. Oh my goodness. Yeah, that's everything I have to say about Horace. So Horace, again, I want to just keep reiterating, the most important thing that he wrote are the Odes. He wrote a number of other works, like I said, but what we will be focusing on the channel are the Odes, because that's what everybody has to read. I will not be uploading another Horace video until the earliest of 2026, and late 2026 at that. So if you're going to leave anything in the comments like where are the videos, if you're not watching at that point in the future, you just get this. And in fact, do check out the description below, because I have included so many links and so many good summaries that I found, or good breakdowns that I found, to help you guys actually read the Odes and encourage you on your way and all of that kind of stuff. So in the meantime, before I come back and I continue this series and we break down these poems and we go into them, please do check out the description below, and you can find so many little tidbits down there. But it's about time that I love you and leave you. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll be seeing you next time with more videos here on MoAn Inc. I'll see you guys then.